The marble floor was cold against Simone Carter's knees, and the two men gripping her arms were not gentle about it. 43 guests sat frozen at their tables in the grand hall of the Beckett estate, watching, saying nothing. Crystal glasses caught the light overhead. Nobody moved to help her. Nobody dared. Baek Do-hyun was 10,000 miles away in Manila, closing a deal that had taken him 3 weeks to build. That is what everyone in that room believed. That belief is what let this happen. Simone's white dress was already stained with wine, red spreading across the fabric, like something spilled from inside her rather than onto her. Her jaw was tight, her eyes were dry. She had spent years arguing cases in front of judges who wanted her to fail, and she had never once given them the satisfaction of watching her break. She was not going to start now, not on the floor of her own home, not in front of people who had waited 11 days for exactly this moment. Somewhere behind her, Baek Son-hwa stood at the head of the table with her hands folded, watching without a flicker of protest crossing her face. Somewhere to the side, Baek Ji-hoon sat with his phone angled down, recording every second of it. And then, without warning, the doors at the far end of the hall began to move. Before we go further, if this story already has your heart racing, that means you are exactly where you need to be. Hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what happens in the next few minutes is going to change everything you think you know about this family. Stay with me. The reveal is coming. 11 days earlier, none of this seemed possible. Simone Carter had built a life most people would call remarkable long before she ever set foot in South Korea. She had argued human rights cases in courtrooms from Geneva to Washington, D.C. She had looked down men far more dangerous than anyone sitting in that banquet hall and never once flinched. She met Baek Do-hyun 3 years earlier at a private dinner overlooking the Han River in Yeouido, back when she was in Seoul negotiating on behalf of a refugee resettlement program that had run out of options everywhere else. He said almost nothing that entire evening. It was the silence that caught her attention. Everyone else at that table had been performing confidence, filling the air with promises and numbers. Do-hyun did not need to perform anything at all. She had not known yet what his family really was. By the time she understood the shipping empire, the contracts that lived on paper and the ones that did not, she had already fallen too far to turn back. She made her choice anyway, with her eyes wide open, the way she made every important choice in her life. That morning, standing at the window of the east bedroom, she watched rain fall over the estate grounds and thought about how long it had been since she had heard his voice, without static on the line. 11 days. His texts were short, the way they always were. Negotiation extended. 2 more weeks. You have everything you need. She typed back that she was fine. She was not. The knock on her door did not ask permission. It announced itself, one sharp strike against the wood, and the door opened before Simone had said a word. Han Ye-rin stepped inside, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and an expression built to look pleasant while meaning nothing of the kind. Household meeting, she said, not looking at Simone, looking instead at the rain streaking the window as if Simone's face were a sight she had not agreed to look at yet. 10 minutes. I was not told about a meeting, Simone said. You are being told now. Downstairs, in the receiving hall, Baek Seon-hwa sat at the head of the table like a woman who had already decided how the conversation would end before it began. At 71, she carried herself the way certain old buildings do, upright, not out of comfort, but out of sheer will. Beside her sat Ji-hoon, wearing the easy smile that had gotten him out of trouble since childhood and had never once meant safety for anyone else in the room. We are making adjustments, Se-hwa said. All household accounts will be managed under my authority until my son returns. Any purchase above a certain amount will require my approval first. That is a significant change from how things have been handled, Simone said, keeping her voice level. Things have been handled incorrectly. Son-hwa's smile did not reach her eyes. My son is not here. 4 words. That was the entire argument, and everyone at the table understood it was final. Ji-hoon leaned forward, all warmth and reassurance. Only temporary, he said. Mother wants to personally oversee the ancestral banquet. It is tradition. Surely, you understand tradition. Simone thought about calling Do-hyun right then. She thought about it the way you think about air when a hand is closing around your throat. She had made that call twice before, in her first year of marriage, and both times, the peace that followed felt less like resolution and more like a countdown to the next quiet cruelty. She was tired of temporary ceasefires. We will discuss the specifics in writing, she said, and walked back upstairs, with her spine straight and her hands steady, until she reached her room and closed the door, and only then did she let her shoulders drop. By morning, her access code no longer worked. The company managing the estate's security system informed her, politely, with practiced regret, that her clearance had been downgraded to guest status. Guest, in her own home. Over the following days, Simone watched her place in that house disappear in pieces, and the cruelty of it was that nothing could be pointed to directly. Nothing could be proven. Nothing was ever said out loud that could not be explained away as coincidence or tradition or simple household logistics. Her housekeeper, a warm woman named Yuna, who had been the first person in that estate to treat Simone like she belonged there, was reassigned without warning. The woman who replaced her barely spoke and disappeared for long stretches at odd hours. Simone later learned she was reporting Simone's daily movements directly to Seon-hwa. Meals became their own quiet insult. The formal dining table, where Simone and Do-hyun had eaten together for 3 years, was suddenly reserved for family only, in preparation for the banquet. Simone was redirected, politely and unmistakably, to a small side room the staff used during off hours. No windows facing the evening light, the smell of cleaning solution lingering in the air. She brought a book to every meal, so her hands would have something to do besides shake. Yerin visited twice that week, always with tea, always with words shaped like compliments that landed like knives. The first visit, she mentioned that certain dresses tended to emphasize what she called unfamiliarity. Simone asked her to explain what she meant. Yerin only smiled and changed the subject. The second visit, she brought up children, the way the banquet guests would certainly ask about bloodline, how the question always came up at gatherings like this, how it was nothing personal, simply history, nothing personal. Simone had heard that phrase used to excuse more damage than almost any other words in the English language. That night, Simone sat on the floor of her bedroom, not the bed, the floor, because sometimes the floor felt more honest, and called her older sister in Atlanta. Denise Carter was a high school principal, the kind of woman whose voice alone could steady a room from 1,000 miles away. Simone told her everything. The access codes, the meals, the housekeeper, the comments about bloodline. You need to call Do-hyun, Denise said. I know. Then why have not you? Simone looked at her own hands. Because telling him makes it real in a different way, she said. And then I have to watch what he does about it, and live here with what is left afterward. You are protecting the people who are hurting you, Denise said, not as an accusation, just as a fact laid plainly on the table between them. Simone did not answer, because there was not an answer that did not hurt to say out loud. If you enjoy stories that do not just entertain you, but stay with you long after they end, this is exactly the kind of channel worth sticking around for. A like and a comment tells me you are paying attention, and it helps this story reach someone else who needs to hear it today. 12 more days passed, and the bruise came before the banquet did. Simone was walking down the corridor near the east wing, when one of Seon-hwa's newly appointed household staff stepped directly into her path. It might have been an accident. It might not have been. She caught herself hard against the banister to keep from falling, and a dark mark bloomed across her forearm by evening. She did not mention it to anyone. She was not even sure, in that moment, that it counted as something worth mentioning, and that uncertainty frightened her more than the bruise itself. Somewhere in the last 11 days, her own standard for what she was willing to tolerate had quietly shifted, and she had not noticed it happening until it had already happened. The banquet preparations moved through the house like a machine. Caterers, decorators. Seong-hwa, directing all of it, with the authority of a woman who had never once doubted her own correctness. Through Hyun-ji, the household's young translator, who had become something like a quiet ally, Seon learned the guest list included syndicate captains and several men whose opinions, in this world, carried real weight. She also learned she would not be seated with them. Madame Bak has arranged for you to help coordinate from the back hall, Hyun-ji said, eyes on the floor, her voice barely above a whisper. Simone looked at her for a long moment. Coordinate, she repeated. I am sorry, Hyun-ji said, and she meant it, which somehow made it worse. That night, alone in her room, Simone made a decision. She would not coordinate from the back hall. She would not make herself small enough to slide through the cracks of her own house without disturbing anyone. She would sit at that table, she would be seen, and if the Baekik family wanted to exclude the wife of their own son from their family banquet, they would have to do it in front of every single person they had invited to witness it. She told no one. She wrote nothing down, she simply decided. The night of the banquet arrived exactly the way dreaded nights always do, too fast and somehow already darker than it should have been. Simone put on a white dress. It was the only color she considered. She walked into the grand hall, and every conversation in the room stopped at once, the way conversation stops when something unexpected walks through a door and refuses to be easily explained. She took her seat at the table. She looked at no one. She sat straight, and she breathed, and she waited to see what the Baek family would do, now that the exit they had built for her had turned out to be the one she never took. What they did was worse than anything she had prepared herself for. Two of Seon-hwa's men crossed the room before Simone understood what was happening, before she could stand, before she could do anything at all except feel her arms seized and her knees forced down onto marble that had never once, in 3 years, felt this cold. Yerin's wineglass tipped, almost carelessly, and red spread across white fabric, while 2 guests looked away, and a third managed a laugh that died somewhere in his throat before it finished leaving his mouth. And it was in that exact moment, with the room gone silent and Simone's knees pressed into stone, that the doors at the far end of the grand hall did not open so much as they simply moved, as if something on the other side had decided doors were no longer necessary. Standing in the entrance, rain still dark on the shoulders of his coat, was Baek Do-hyun, 3 days early, and the look on his face was not the look of a man who needed to raise his voice to be understood. If you have made it this far, you already know this story is about to turn into something you will not want to look away from. Subscribe now, turn on your notifications, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from tonight, because the next part is where everything this family built starts coming apart, and you do not want to miss a second of it. The first sound to return to the grand hall was breathing. Not conversation, not the scrape of a chair, just 43 people remembering all at once that their lungs still needed air, and that the man standing in the doorway was Baek Do-hyun, and that whatever they had done a moment ago now had to be answered for. He did not move right away. That was the thing about him. People always underestimated. Men who dealt in violence usually announced themselves with noise, with sighs, with the theater of intimidation. Do-hyun had never needed any of that. He stood there with rain darkening his shoulders, his eyes moving slowly across the room, and the stillness of him did more than shouting ever could have done. He saw the wine stain on Simone's dress first, then the 2 men still gripping her arms, then his mother standing at the head of the table, her expression cycling through surprise and recalculation so fast it barely looked human. Then Ji-hoon, 2 seats down, phone angled toward the floor, thumb still hovering over the screen. He crossed the room at a pace that was not fast, and was not slow. The pace of a man who had already decided how this ends and did not need to hurry toward it. The men holding Simone let go before he even reached her, stepping back the way objects sometimes rearrange themselves around something that cannot be redirected. He knelt in front of her. For a moment, he just looked at her face, and whatever he found there changed something in his own, barely visible, just a shift around his eyes. He took her hand and brought her to her feet, careful the way you are careful with something that matters more than you are currently letting yourself show. He took off his coat and set it over her shoulders without asking. "Are you hurt?" he said, quiet, aimed only at her. "I am standing," she said. It was not an answer, and they both knew it. But there was not time for the real answer yet, because Simone's eyes moved briefly to the room full of people watching, and Do-hyun followed her gaze, and then he turned to face all of them. "Who touched my wife?" he said. 4 words. No raised voice, a question asked the way you ask something that has already been decided, one where the answer will be given, whether anyone wants to give it or not. Nobody spoke. He let the silence sit for 8 full seconds, and 8 seconds is a very long time when 43 people are holding their breath into it. Then he raised one hand toward the door, and his head of security, Co Dae-hyun, was already moving. "Phones," Dae-hyun said to the room. "On the table. Now." There was a pause, the kind of pause that comes from people who have not yet processed that tonight has permanently changed shape. Then phones started appearing on tablecloths, the way things appear when there is no version of refusing left available. Ji-hoon's was the last one down, set face first with the careful stillness of a man trying not to show that his hands are doing something he does not want anyone to notice. Do-hyun's eyes tracked it, did not move to it, just tracked it. "You are home early," his mother said, stepping forward, her voice composed in the way it had been composed for 50 years. "How long?" he said. "I do not. How long has this been happening while I was away?" Not a question of whether, a question of how long, which meant he already knew the answer existed, and her face knew it too. He walked to the wall panel beside the closed service door and opened it himself, connecting the room's screens to the estate's security archive, something he had built into his own home years earlier, because information was the one thing that could not be taken from you if you stored it correctly. The screens flickered to life. The timestamp in the corner read 11 days ago, and the room watched. I need to pause here for a second, because if this story is already pulling something out of you, that reaction is exactly why I do this. Please hit subscribe and tap that notification bell, because what is on those screens is about to change how every single person in that hall sees this family, including the people sitting in it. The footage played in silence, except for the low hum of the equipment and the sound of rain still falling outside. It showed Seon-hwa directing 2 staff members to change Simone's access codes on the 2nd day. It showed Ji-hoon handing the replacement housekeeper a folded piece of paper in the hallway, instructions written on paper instead of sent digitally, because Ji-hoon was careful about the trails he left behind. It showed Ye-rin entering Simone's sitting room with tea and leaving 20 minutes later, and Simone sitting alone afterward with her hands flat on the table, working hard at containing something she was not ready to release. It showed the corridor, the staff member stepping into Simone's path, Simone catching herself on the banister, Do-hyun's jaw tightened watching that one. Not much, just enough that Dae-hyun, standing near the wall, noticed it and understood exactly what it meant. Then the footage reached tonight, the banquet. Simone walking in wearing white. The nod between Seon-hwa and Ji-hoon that the camera's microphone had not caught, but that did not need audio to be understood. The wine glass tilting in Ye-rin's hand. The 2 men crossing the room toward Simone's chair. Do-hyun turned the screen off. He stood with his back to the room for a moment. Nobody moved. Then he turned around, walked to where Ji-hoon was sitting, and picked up his brother's phone from the table. "Unlock it," he said. Ji-hoon's jaw worked, but there was nothing left to negotiate with. He unlocked it. Dae-hyun scrolled through it in silence for almost 2 minutes, and the look that settled onto his face was the look of a man who had gone looking for the worst possible explanation and found it anyway. "How many meetings?" Do-hyun said, still looking at his brother. Not asking if, asking how many. "With the Cho family," Ji-hoon said, and the room shifted at the name, because everyone who understood the landscape of this world knew exactly who Cho Tae-sung was, and exactly what it meant that Baek Ji-hoon had been speaking to him. "You were losing influence," Ji-hoon said, and his voice had the sound of something rehearsed, being performed under conditions the rehearsal never accounted for. "People were saying your judgment was compromised, that marrying her made you look weak in front of the old families." "She has a name," Simone said. The room turned toward her. She was standing slightly apart from Do-hyun, his coat still over her shoulders, looking at Ji-hoon with the expression of someone who had moved past anger into something colder and far more precise. "Say it," she said. "You have lived in this house for years. You have eaten at my table. Say my name." Ji-hoon's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "That is what I thought," Simone said. Do-hyun's mother tried to reassert herself, because she had spent 7 decades believing there was no wrong moment for her to do exactly that. "The concerns Ji-hoon raised," she said, "were not without foundation. I did not approve of the methods, but the underlying." "You watched," Do-hyun said. 7 days ago, you stood in that corridor and watched 2 staff members tell her the side room was the only space available to her, and you said nothing. You turned around and walked back to your own sitting room. There are things about running a family of our standing that require. You let them treat my wife like she was less than the staff, he said, his voice dropping even further, which meant only the people closest to him could hear it clearly, and everyone else had to lean in, and the leaning in was its own kind of confession. In my house, while I was away. And you had every chance to act differently, and you chose not to. The silence that followed was the heaviest one yet. Da-hyun's earpiece crackled. He leaned toward Do-hyun and said something low and fast. Do-hyun's face did not change, but something behind it did. "Vehicles," Da-hyun said. 4 of them, 2 kilometers out, moving toward the east perimeter. Do-hyun looked at his brother. His brother had been talking to a rival family. His brother had documented tonight specifically to hand someone outside evidence that the head of the Baek family could not control his own house. "Get the senior captains to the east wing," Do-hyun told Dae-hyun. "Everyone else stays in this room." He turned to Simone. "Upstairs," he said. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone who does not knock the pattern we agreed on years ago." "We are going to talk about all of this," she said quietly. "Everything." "I know," he said. "All of it. I am sorry. I know that is not enough right now." She went. He watched her clear the doorway, and then he turned back to the room, and the man who turned around was not the same man who had been speaking to his wife 30 seconds earlier. This has been building towards something for a while now, and if you want to see exactly how far this family's collapse goes, stay with me, because we are just getting to the part that changes everything. Drop a comment, and let me know what you think Ji-hoon's punishment should be. I read every single one. The service door at the south end of the utility building was standing open when Do-hyun and Dae-hyun reached it, and that alone told them everything they needed to know. Someone had been inside the estate before the vehicles ever arrived. Inside, a man was crouched over an open server panel, a laptop balanced on the floor beside him. Jong Min-suk stood up too fast when he heard them, and an indicator light on the rack above him flipped from green to red. Do-hyun had known Min-suk for 9 years, trusted him with every layer of the estate's security. Min-suk had grown up 2 streets from Ji-hoon, their families close since childhood, a detail Do-hyun had noted once and filed away as unimportant. "What did you do to my system?" Do-hyun said. Min-suk's hands were shaking. "Ji-hoon asked me to reroute the outbound communications line," he said, through the Cho family's network. For the past 2 weeks. Do-hyun felt something cold settle into his chest. 2 weeks of negotiation calls from Manila. 2 weeks of strategy, contacts, leverage points, all of it sitting in the hands of a rival syndicate the entire time he thought he was operating in secret. And tonight, Dae-hyun said, still reading the laptop screen, Ji-hoon transmitted a video through that same line before we took his phone. Footage of Simone on her knees. It already reached 6 other numbers. It was not a family dispute anymore. It was a public demonstration, aimed straight at Cho Tae-sung's people, proof that the back organization was breaking apart from the inside and ready to be taken. "Close the line," Do-hyun said. "Already done," Dae-hyun answered. "But the video has been out for 40 minutes. That is a long time in this world." Outside, headlights swept across the tree line. 4 vehicles at first. Then Dae-hyun's earpiece crackled again, and his face changed. 12, he said, not 4. 12 vehicles. Do-hyun looked at the men around him, his own security team, the loyal captains who had traveled in for the banquet, all of them waiting on his next word. He did the math fast and found exactly where the math turned difficult. Somewhere across the property, Naya's equivalent, Simone, was moving toward a car that would take her to safety in Mapo, and every minute that passed before that car cleared the estate gates was a minute that mattered more than anything else happening on this ground tonight. The fight at the south gate lasted 11 minutes, and 11 minutes is a very long stretch of time when you are inside it. Do-hyun took a hit across his shoulder that ran fire down his arm. Ji-hoon, disgraced, stripped of his phone and his standing not 10 minutes earlier, walked out into the rain anyway, and stood at his brother's side without being asked, and when a man came at Do-hyun from the blind side, Ji-hoon hit him with everything he had. No training behind it, just the plain decision that this was not a night he was going to sit safely indoors, while his brother stood alone at the weakest point of the line. When it ended, the Cho family's vehicles pulled back from every perimeter point at once, which meant somebody senior on their side had done the math too, and had decided the Beck estate tonight was not the easy target they had been promised. Later, standing in front of the captains who had chosen to stay, bruised, his jacket torn, a cut healing above one eyebrow, Do-hyun said the words that would define what came after. "No one in this family will ever again be judged by blood, by race, or by who they married," he said. "Character is the only currency that matters here now. Anyone who cannot stand behind that is free to leave without consequence tonight." Most of them stood. Hours later, in a quiet kitchen across the city, with tea gone cold between them, Do-hyun told Simone everything, all of it, no version shaped for an audience, just the truth in the order it happened. And Simone told him what she had never said out loud in 3 years, about the bruise she had hidden, about being tired of being the one who had to manage the peace afterward, about needing him simply to see it and believe her, not fix it, just see it. "I built walls and called it protection," he said. "I never once asked what you needed protecting from." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. It was not forgiveness yet. It was 2 people finally standing in the same truth at the same time, which is sometimes the only place real healing is able to begin. In the months that followed, the estate changed in ways that went far past new paint or new locks. The grand hall, where Simone had once knelt on cold marble, was rebuilt into a community space for local families, a place where the old rules about bloodline and worth no longer applied to anyone who walked through its doors. Ji-hoon lost every title and every asset he had once carried, but he was not cast out of his brother's life entirely, and slowly, awkwardly, the 2 of them began to find out what a relationship without power between them could actually look like. Seonhwa's authority was gone for good, but something in her had cracked open too, and one afternoon, months later, she asked Simone a real question about her work, without judgment hiding underneath it, and for 20 minutes they simply talked like 2 people instead of 2 roles. A year after that night, Do-hyun found Simone standing in the courtyard where the old family altar used to sit. "It is open ground now," she said, watching the rain fall soft and gray around them, "used for something that matters." He took her hand, and they stood there together, not because everything was healed, but because something true had been built in its place, something that neither of them could have imagined on the night it all nearly fell apart. If this story moved you even a little, that is exactly why I keep telling them. Subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story that reminds you what real strength and real change actually look like. And before you go, tell me in the comments which moment hit you the hardest tonight. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to read today.